COVID y la nueva realidad de la industria retail de la moda. ¿Qué sigue? Richard Naranjo, Kering, Estados Unidos. Eduardo Perez, Yves Laurent, Estados Unidos. Moderador, Anthony Lupo, Arent Fox, LLP, Estados Unidos.
Hello to everybody. Thank you for being with us. Good afternoon, or wherever you are. Good night. We're here today on a fashion panel, which is kind of like Tony did a presentation in our Congress in Montevideo that spoke a little bit about the tendency of the industry going to digital platforms. So then, of course, the pandemic hit. So it's with great pleasure, to now present our three speakers. First is Anthony Lupo, recognized as the father of fashion law by Forbes, in the host of the #1 fashion legal blog called the Fashion Council and Industry blog. Anthony Lupo's practice is primarily focused on the areas of fashion, entertainment, and technology. He represents brands such as DVF, Valentino, Lacoste, Diesel, Jimmy Choo, Kering, Louboutin, Tesla, and Discovery. Serves as outside general counsel for many high-end European fashion and luxury goods companies, handling corporate real estate, employment, class action, national and national distribution matters, California specific litigation. In addition to his work in the fashion industry, Anthony is considered a leader in the retail and e-commerce space. Anthony was named as one of the top 3 retail and e-commerce lawyers in the U.S. by Law 360. Then we have Eduardo Perez. Eduardo Perez is the Chief Financial Officer at Yves Saint Laurent Americas. He spent the last 16 years of his career in the fashion industry. Prior to joining Yves Saint Laurent, he was CFO at Lacoste USA, and before that led the finance team for the emerging brands at Gucci Group. Eduardo received his BA in accounting from Rutgers and MBA in finance from St. John's, and he was born in Puerto Rico. Richard Naranjo, Vice President of Finance, Kering Americas. Richard Naranjo is the Vice President of Finance at Kering Americas, overseeing finance shared services in the US, Canada, Mexico, and Brazil. He has over 18 years of experience with finance and accounting with Kering and Gucci Group prior to that. Before his current position, he served as the CFO for Gucci North America and worked as a controller as well as other finance functions for Gucci for 16 years. Richard has worked in roles related to accounting in apparel and fashion throughout his entire career in such companies such as J. Crew and Maidenform. He earned his BA in business accounting from New Jersey City University. And by the way, his parents are from Ecuador. So guys, welcome. The panel is yours, Tony.
Thanks, Ricardo. Once again, thank you for joining us today. This sort of is a continuation of the presentation that we gave before on omni-channeling in the fashion industry. But we've been able to gather 2 experts in the field that had to navigate for some of the largest fashion companies in the world, not only the US, but also Latin America, and how they dealt with the pandemic and COVID. And so we're going to talk today first about what Rich and Eduardo did to really navigate when the crisis came on. And, Rich had mentioned earlier that really agility was the key word, and you had to be agile and be able to adapt to what was coming at you. With COVID, this was all uncharted territory. And so you were trying to make your best business decisions on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to talk about what they did to navigate. And we're going to also talk about what maybe the landscape of Latin America and the US fashion market is going to look like post-vaccine. So why don't we jump in? One of the biggest expenses that you guys had to control in an emergency situation was supply chain. You had to make sure that your factories were producing, that the products were going to be delivered on time, what type of inventory was coming and the like. What was one of the first things you guys had to do to really get control of that? why don't we start with you, Rich?
Yes. So from our side, it became particularly challenging because all of our product is made in Europe, and all of that gets ordered 6 months ahead of time. So you basically need to prioritize not only by region in terms of by city and country, but also by not only by city, I should say, but by country as well. So you really need to try to divert the products in the most effective way possible. See where there's activity. COVID, of course, hit different places at different times, so you really needed to try and move that inventory sort of along with the wave to follow that logic as much as possible. Which sounds very simplistic, but of course, from a logistics perspective, can be quite challenging.
Eduardo, how'd you guys face
Yeah,
this?
I think to add on to that, obviously with our number one factor in working capital being product, that supply chain was the first thing that we really needed to kind of hone in on as soon as we realized the unprecedented time that we were facing. I think the good thing is that, at least for this region, was that we had a little bit of lead time, right? We were kind of starting to see what was happening in China and starting to try to anticipate what could be coming down the pipeline. And in that anticipation effort, what we tried to do was really say, okay, what have we produced? What is still able to get canceled in production? And what do we absolutely need or don't need? And so there was a moment where we all collectively had to look at the supply chain and say, okay, what can we cancel? And so we did a little bit of that. We were able to minimize that level of working capital and risk. And then to Rich's point, it was then trying to really understand how to really manage the inventory across different regions, across different countries. As you know, in Latin America, some countries are a little bit more complicated to import than others. So the lead time in Brazil is very different than the lead time in Mexico, and Panama, and et cetera. So, then trying to figure out how to prioritize in order to anticipate those kind of things. So, supply chain was definitely something that we tried to tackle first and foremost. It was under our umbrella. And I think we did a fairly good job given the time sensitivity and the circumstances.
And then you had inventory. I know in the U.S., part of what you guys were scrambling was to move inventory from one store that was open to another store or one store that was closed to another store that was open. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and, whether you were able to do this in Latin America or, as you said, Eduardo, because of the customs and the duties, it was impossible to get product between countries.
Yeah, I think once we were able to figure out what we can stop producing, then we were focusing on what can we do with what we have produced and what we have, right? And optimizing the existing stock and reallocating across different countries and different regions really took the priority at that point. We were able to do that. And again, timing was also very key. Every country was in a different kind of clock when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic and when it hit each country and when each country was aware of the situation. So, and then, the added complexity was what was happening on a state-by-state level, right? And whether we're talking about, the state of California or we're talking about, the state of Sao Paulo, either way, each state had a different set of rules they were kind of starting to implement. And so we quickly, along the supply chain and logistics, had to really focus in on, staying on top of all the information that was coming in at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and trying to be just try to adapt and agile enough and flexible enough to try to get product among different countries and along different states at different times throughout the pandemic.
And do you have any war stories about moving product between the countries in Latin America? Or, was that just too difficult to do? Because it's much easier in the U.S. to move product from California to Denver. And if I remember correctly from when we had done a prep session, one of the things was the malls in Denver continue to be open like there's no pandemic at all, so the stores are doing fine there. But when you go to New York, the stores are shut down. And now in California today, they're shut down as well. Did you guys have experience? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of that. I mean, and we could even hone in on Latin America. I think, the speed in which, let's say, Mexico, moved during the pandemic early on, and the speed at which Brazil moved, and even Panama was very different. And at the end, for example, Panama, which is maybe one of the smaller, countries, ended up shutting down for the longest period of time in Latin America. And so although it's easier to move goods in and out of Panama, it also was one of the countries that was closed the longest and took a longer time to try to start the recovery process. So we definitely had a lot of that. And so we really had to find ways to just be agile enough along our supply chain logistics teams and our operations teams to really move things around. It wasn't easy. It really took a lot of effort on everyone's part. But for sure, the complexities along each country in Latin America definitely had a different road to recovery, per se.
I would add, I would add to that, just it's not just moving across regions, but also across channels, because of course, with everything being shut down, the one place where everyone turned to basically get their products was e-commerce, was the digital space. So from our side, we were fortunate also that we have a fairly large support structure for the e-commerce leg, and for us that really started to take off quite a bit, and we started to just transition manpower more focused on supporting the e-com business versus the retail.
I think that's a very good point, but also just to add to that is the fact that the digital infrastructure, digital footprint in North America is a lot more advanced for us than it is in Latin America. And so, it was a lot more challenging to try to, let's say, take advantage of the digital footprint in Latin America. I think, despite that, we're still able to handle different channels, to Rich's point, like marketplaces and all these different kind of business models that still allowed us to maximize what I would say is a digital footprint during the pandemic in Latin America.
How did you guys deal with vendors? I think, Eduardo, you mentioned that there was a big difference in how you dealt with vendors in the U.S. compared to vendors in Latin America, just the culture and how, who approached who.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously, once we kind of took care of, or at least started the process of taking care of product, then obviously we were focused on vendors and payables and all the different costs associated to operating the businesses. Obviously after, inventory and payroll, the next thing is rent, right? So, for me, the experience across the entire region of how to handle such an unprecedented and unexpected pandemic with partners was quite an experience. But one of the things that did stick out to me personally was just, I guess, the relational kind of component as to how each handle it. I think that the North American landlords handling of those discussions, when I compared to the Latin American landlords, very different. I think that in Latin America there was a much more openness to be proactive. I mean, the landlords in Latin America were reaching out to me in some cases before I could even reach out to them to find out how we can work together to survive this unprecedented time, where, it's a little bit more transactional and less warm in the North America kind of handling of these kind of situations. So for me, that was a very clear outlier between North America and Latin America.
Yeah, in North America, we're just getting sued. All my clients are being sued. So they're all on court about, not paying enough rent. So
sounds about right.
Yeah. Rich, any experience on your end on, dealing with landlords? What was your experience?
From my side, it was more very, very much as Eduardo said, and it's really relation based at the end of the day. I think that more and more when you have larger companies working together, they have to see each other as partners. And if you have that long lasting relationship and you have something that well, basically, we think it's going to last longer than the 2-3 months that we thought at that time was going to be the case. It's clearly been a lot longer. But you have to basically, there's value in that, having those long-standing relationships prior, and basically getting your landlords to recognize that, and usually you can leverage it in some way, shape, or form. You can also leverage any future agreements that you may have with the landlords. So sometimes people think that working with a larger corporation can be a bit restrictive, but I think in that regard, it gives you a little bit more flexibility, because you can also leverage any future agreements that are still pending to basically help to smooth over or to get you where you need to get to on something else.
Sticking with you, Rich, one of the terms you used, I think, was really shuffling payments with regard to vendors and the like. Maybe you can talk for a moment about this. As cash flow sort of dries up for a moment, customers stop shopping and the like, you have a certain amount of cash flow to keep the boat afloat.
Yeah, I think Eduardo used the right word, which is prioritize. At the end of the day, you need to really prioritize, and what are the major functions that you can't live without. So as we all started working virtually, those technology vendors became pretty important pretty quickly, more so than they had in the past. So you really just wanted to prioritize at the end of the day. And as Eduardo said, his landlord reached out to him. And you reach out to the vendors, and basically, again, and it's leveraging those relationships. And this is where good payment history comes into play as well. So if you've had a vendor that you've worked with for years, and you've got a long-standing good terms of credit with them, you can leverage that as well. But it's prioritizing at the end of the day and leveraging those relationships to the fullest extent.
I think we all went through the same thing, regardless of industry organization during this pandemic, right? As CFOs or financial people and managing cash flow during the pandemic, we all tried to prioritize. We tried to minimize costs. We tried to, delay vendor payments where possible. We tried to renegotiate contracts, renegotiate payment terms. I think everybody, had the same toolkit to work with. I think the successful the success in that area really came down to, this non-transactional lens, is when we're able to kind of sit on both sides of the table as partners and vendor and say, we didn't start this pandemic, but we're in it together. So how do we work together and share in the burden? And I think that in the conversations, and I know there's a lot of lawyers on this, on here listening. And so there's going to be a lot more focus on what the contract says and what the legal rights are. But I have to tell you, during a pandemic, those aren't exactly the priority. It really is about survival in something like this. This is so unprecedented. And I think when both parties look at it like that, they find a way to put all the, legal language aside for a second and say, let's work together. And I think that's where we were able to succeed.
And that worked really well in the middle of the heat, but now the lawyers are getting engaged. And there's a lot of billable hours on this call right now. As to the audience, I will say, please submit your questions by email, and I'll make sure that they get to Eduardo and Rich. Continuing on in this line of questioning, the last area that companies had to struggle with was payroll, employees. I mean, a lot of companies took the approach of really downsizing quickly. I think you guys handled it a little bit differently. Maybe you can talk on that and how you dealt with that.
Yeah, I can take this one first. I think, as we said before, we prioritized, and again, this really goes back to each company's individual position and also their thinking. And that was one of the things that we had at the priority, was how do we continue to ensure their employees get paid. It went to the top of the priority, and we set those funds aside. Then we also started to look at what incentives are there in order for us to help to do this, because a lot of governments, especially in the U.S., in the U.S. there was some federal funding that became available. So we started to identify, can we utilize those? Does it make sense to do that? and do we qualify? Do we want our names associated with those types of actions as well? And then we went through that. But from our side, it was basically identifying how long could we do this, and basically being financially responsible. We're fortunate that we have financial strength to manage it, and we were able to cope through the majority of it. And then once you have those employees and you're securing them, what do you do with them? You don't want to pay people to just sit at home. So we tried to maximize their time in some way, shape, or form. Some were able to get to work from home. It's tough for you to sell a handbag from home, as Eduardo can attest. But there's other ways that you can do that, and try and get value for what you're paying.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think it's important to note that our, let's say, journey to the pandemic, whether it's from the Kering perspective or the Saint Laurent perspective, it could be very different than many others. And we acknowledge the fact that some companies can do some of the things that we did easier than others, and that there's smaller organizations that have a tougher time. But one of the things we really wanted to try to do from the beginning, and this is something that I'm very proud of, is, we all sat down and said, that the number one priority was the employees, and that we wanted to try not to make this more, let's say, harder on everyone than it already was. And so we decided early on that we wanted to continue to pay, that we weren't going to lay off employees or furlough or anything like that. Now, that's a very challenging thing to do with no revenues. But it started with just making that a core value, a core principle of the organization. We kind of worked through it. I want to add sort of the how more complicated that could be in Latin America. Obviously with countries like Brazil with collective bargaining agreements and all these different things, it does get a little bit more complicated. But I think that at the heart of it all, I think regardless of the employment law or the collective bargaining agreement, I think most people really appreciated the attempt regardless. And, I think that's where we were able to find a way, country by country, to just help our employees survive the pandemic as well. And so, I think it's just something I'm super proud of. I know it's not that easy for every organization, but it's the route we took. Now, obviously, no one has indefinite funds, right? So at some point, if the recovery didn't start back again, we could have had to, make tougher decisions. But, we definitely survived the toughest part of this. We're still on the road to recovery, but I think the employees are a lot more engaged and grateful and just loyal. A lot more loyal to the organization for what we were able to do, even as complex as it is in certain countries.
Yeah. And if I would add one more small detail to that, I think you basically took it step by step, right? So you basically said, okay, we feel that we could guarantee payroll for X number of weeks, and then we'll take it from there. So you kind of took baby steps, and I think Eduardo said surviving. And that's really, that's the survival playbook at the end of the day. How long can my funds last me until I can do this? That I can really, I don't want to say guarantee because nothing is guaranteed, but I can at least, come to the table and say, this is what I can do. I can do 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And then once we get to that, closer to that point in time, we'll reevaluate. And again, but always with the intention to have no pay interruption for our employees.
So you guys both are in charge of a number of Latin American countries. I know, Rich, you do a lot of work in Mexico. Eduardo, you have Panama and Brazil quite a bit. And I think, Rich, you might have Panama as well. Did you guys notice a big difference in how countries dealt with this and how the retail environment was? I mean, I had a prep call with Eduardo a couple of days ago, and it was from his hotel in Rio de Janeiro. And I asked him, are people wearing masks? And he said, this is Rio, people don't wear clothes, which was great for a chuckle. But you do have different cultures that you have to deal with, and how not just the country, but the state, in that country dealt with the issue. I'm sure Sao Paulo was very different than Rio, for example. What any observations that you guys saw?
From our side, we basically had this became a full-time job. Was keeping track of what is, forget Brazil, what is Sao Paulo doing different than say Rio, and what's Mexico City doing. So we actually had people on our staff inside of our loss prevention and legal teams dedicating a ton of time just to try and understand what we can do so we could navigate through it all. We still to this day have updates as to where which hotspots are spiking again. But we did see something that I think it's what you're seeing in the U.S. as well. It's striking different places at different times. So it was really difficult for you to just say a blanket statement. You need to do X, and that's what made it really difficult. And I think again, governments were juggling the health factor versus the economic factor, which is quite normal. So it was that's my observation, is that it's because it didn't all hit at once. It was really difficult to navigate through, and you really need to dedicate a lot of resources to keep track of it and try to get a handle on it.
Yeah, I think that, what we really try to do is work with our local partners to really try to stay on top of every moving part, whether it's our, Mexico legal team, our Brazil legal team, our Panama legal team, really understanding state by state what's happening, obviously trying to respect every single one of the state laws that were being, put in place, while at the same time grabbing the state mandates and trying to create an overall organizational framework, right? Some guidelines that could help. And despite that, I don't think there's a way to really stay on top of it all at the pace that it's moving. This is definitely not intended to be political, but I think it's super clear, especially in Latin America, that every let's say leader of each country handled it a very different way. Some a little faster than others, some a little slower than others, some a little more skeptical than others. And I think that also led to a sort of wait and see approach, and try to figure out what is the government doing and then what do we need to apply. But I think at the end of the day, we really wanted to make sure that if a government wasn't making some level of clarity on the topic, that we were going to play it safe. And I think that's what we will try to do everywhere. I just came back from Brazil. So if I had to add, some real-time feedback, I do feel like, every province or every state, is going to have a different feel towards it. You're going to have, a place like Rio right on the beach, a lot more open air, have a different lens to it than, the more city like Sao Paulo. And although everybody is actually trying to respect the guidelines and wearing the masks and all the safety protocol, I think that there's a difference when you're in these different environments. But I did feel that overall, everyone is trying to be safe. Everyone is trying to respect everyone else's, kind of health and safety as well. I think there's a universal kind of, respect for the pandemic going on regardless of the country, even if some are handling maybe a little bit more than others in different ways.
You mentioned about how you guys handled each country and you look to your local partners. I know when you guys go into Latin America, you look at a number of different ways to go in. Either you go in directly and you open up, or you bring in a joint venture with someone, or you license or franchise. Did you see a difference in the countries where you took a different approach in on how you handled this?
Yeah, I could talk from a brand perspective in my experience. I've been with Saint Laurent now for going on 8 years. And since I arrived, we've opened up directly operated businesses in Mexico, in Brazil, in Panama, and even a franchise in the Bahamas. And I would say that the answer to that question is, yeah, we explore all business models, all kinds of, structures that exist. But ultimately, the decision depends on a few factors. Number one is where you are as an organization in terms of your infrastructure, your size, and those kind of things. If you're a startup, the answer to that question is very different than if you're a, 75-year-old multinational brand, with a strong brand equity and already supply chain and infrastructure. So, when we went to look at expanding distribution into Latin America, we explored joint ventures. We explored working with an operator. We explored franchises. We explored the idea of going direct. And every country had a different pros and cons to it. A lot of it relying on, supply chain and logistics, the ability to move product easily, tax implications, all these different things. Ultimately, where we were as a brand at each time ultimately led for us to really focus on a directly operated business. And so we've gone direct in Latin America, and that's probably where we will be. But, there are smaller brands in the industry that are going in with joint ventures or still have some form of joint venture or being operated by someone else as a franchisee. All those different things were taken into account. Where we were in the curve just led ultimately to the decision to go directly operated into these countries.
So now that we're in this, and we have a little bit of experience, do you think that there's going to be a need for the same retail footprint in Latin America? Or do you think that it's going to sort of move more to e-commerce like it did in the US?
I could take a first stab at it if you like. I think it depends on where you stand in terms of the industry. Again, we're both coming from the luxury sector. I think the luxury sector, it's clear that the e-commerce portion of it is growing in importance. And I think that the pandemic has basically brought that to the forefront and has made us more aware of it than we were before. But I don't think that means that brick and mortar will go away. And I think that it's because of, if you're luxury, you're not just selling a handbag, you're not just selling a pair of shoes, you're selling a lifestyle, and you're selling an experience. And that's what our customers look for. So I think that component, I don't know the formula yet for it to be duplicated in a digital sense. So until we find that formula, I believe that you're still going to have space, and there's still going to be need for retail operations and for physical locations.
Yeah, I think for years, right, consumers have been shifting shopping habits to more digital channels anyway. This has been happening for a while now. I think what the pandemic did was just highlight the importance of the digital space and speed up the process. So if, with everyone on lockdown and almost everything, closed or limited or capacity limits and those hours and those kind of things, it's very natural for people to shift to digital for our everyday needs and wants, right? But I think that to Rich's point, when we think about luxury, and where we are in that pyramid of retail or fashion, in our specific segment of the industry, our clients still need, want, and desire that relationship, that connection, that physical experience, And so, brick and mortar is not going to disappear. I think it's just a matter of how to optimize both channels to give the client the best experience possible. And so I don't think brick and mortar retail for luxury is going to disappear. I just think that the shopping habits and how you give that client that experience is going to blend in and become a lot more of a hybrid. But the shift to digital has been going on for years. I think the pandemic just simply sped it up. If you're an organization where your digital footprint is behind, I think now it's clear that it's the number one priority for everyone.
One of the things we're noticing in the U.S. is some of the high-end brands like you guys are making it more of an experience. It's not really even to sell clothing, but to sell an idea. So they'll walk in a flagship store and they'll get a much more feel what the brand's identity and DNA is. With the hopes that people might even go online or if they do shop, one of the things we talked about at the last presentation I had with Mississippi was going in and looking at the products, and then you don't walk out with them; they're actually shipped to your house. That's become a big move in the U.S. I don't know if it will be in Latin America, but one of the things the three of us talked about was the changing footprint and the changing patterns in malls and the like. where before sometimes the mall owner would want to put you deep in the mall to bring traffic throughout the mall. With COVID, at least in the US, what we're learning is a lot of major brands want to be on the outside so they can have customers come and pick up the product without even coming into the mall. Do you imagine this is going to also play down to Latin America, or is the experience just different?
I mean, from my side, I would say I think there's going to be a little of that. I think that's going to continue. I think we've learned a lot from the pandemic. I think the agility to have, or even just the ability to have a location that is close to curbside, or even landlords proposing open air spaces for shopping experience during the pandemic. All these different things do open up the discussion of what are the ideal locations moving forward. If something like this were to happen again, do we want to be, with that entrance from the outside, or do we want to be in the middle with all the traffic? I think those are very fair conversations we're all having now. So I think it will be part of the discussion. But I think that it won't, I don't know if it's going to change the entire, just the way we look at, space, locations, and identifying the best for the brands. I think it'll be a factor. I don't think it's going to change drastically over the long haul.
Yeah, I would just say that this probably goes again hand in hand with where you are in your digital footprint. I think if you have a digital footprint already, that probably becomes less of less important. And if your digital footprint is smaller, that probably increases in importance in terms of that. That would be one point I would make. And then the second point is, do we really believe that this is going to be this is going to be, when you sign the lease, you're signing for 5-10 years. Do we think that this is something we'll have to deal with for 5 or 10 years? That'll be the next thing that you'd have to put into that thinking or into that decision making.
I think more discussions are going to be had about the technology to operate those stores.
Yeah.
So mobile POSs or contactless payments technology and those kind of things, where you can still operate from your location, but you can provide the product and the service in many different forms. So I think that's going to take on a lot more of a priority than it is necessarily picking the space or picking an outdoor center instead of an indoor center and those kind of things.
Are there a lot of outdoor centers in Latin America? Are a lot of your stores in outdoor malls?
No, they're mainly indoor. I mean, where we are in Cancun, obviously is outdoor. There's a few, but I would say, most of our locations are in indoor centers.
So we got a question from the audience, and it says, now that we're seeing avatars promoting clothes more, do you imagine that the brand's reliance on models is going to diminish?
I wouldn't say diminish, in my opinion. I'm actually well aware, actually just had quite a few conversations with the leadership team about some of these things that are happening with avatars and digital spaces. Even some of the video games are now offering boutique options to sell virtual product to it's insane. So this is real. This is happening. But I think that similar to our discussion about how e-commerce will just enhance, I think this is just going to enhance, not replace. There's certain things in our industry, there's certain things in what we do that are just going to be still a pillar of what we do. When it comes to social media and all these different things, how these fashion shows and the product gets out, they still want to see it on someone and then, dream about what that looks like on them. And so I don't think it's going to diminish. I think these things that are happening in the virtual world are real. And I think it's just going to enhance. It's going to actually just maybe expand the client to a new, younger, different generation where they're going to connect with the brand in a different way. But I don't know if it's going to minimize.
I would imagine that influencers are probably just as important today. I know they are in the U.S., but my experience in Latin America is they're also becoming much more dominant than using top models. And the ROI is much better on that. I don't know if you guys have had much exposure on the extent that an influencer produces traffic compared to a top model?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all seeing it. I think that we live in the social media age, right? And so I think it's here. And, I think every brand in some way, shape, or form has partnered with and or experienced the success of what it is to partner with an influencer. And, you already see it. Just look at the shows. There's less and less big name models running the catwalk, but you see a lot more followers on certain people on social media with the product. And so, yeah, I think that it's fair to say that that's something that has been happening in the last few years.
Yeah, I think it slices up that pie, similar to what you were saying, where it won't completely take over everything, but it's definitely something that you have to keep an eye on. It's something that you have to maximize. But I think it'll still be a portion of, not entirety of.
Another question, which brings us back to sort of the topic. One listener is asking, do you see the pandemic will force retailers in Latin America to leverage e-commerce more than they have? You mentioned that it's not as robust as it is in the U.S. or sophisticated, the e-commerce market. Do you imagine that this is going to have the same type of change that it is in the U.S., where you guys are putting more of your effort behind your backbone technology? Do you think that's going to translate into Latin America?
I think so. I mean, absolutely. I think that, pre-pandemic, I think it's safe to say that the digital infrastructure in Latin America was a little bit behind North America. And I think that the experiences we're all learning now is just going to make everyone in Latin America really invest in this kind of arena and make sure that Latin America continues to make the necessary steps forward to build the right infrastructure in order to provide the proper digital network for retail to successfully catch up. So I believe yes.
Yeah, I believe that it was already moving. You already have a lot of inroads from companies such as Farfetch that's already got a strong foothold in Mexico and Brazil. So I think it's already there. It's already undergoing. And as we said, the pandemic is just highlighting the value of it. So I do believe that we're going to start moving in that direction.
I think that's a very good point. And just to add that, I think because of the, let's say, the lack of overall digital infrastructure, I think marketplace is actually something that has been extremely successful in Latin America. I think that's been sort of the plan B until plan A is ready kind of thing, where not just companies like Farfetch, but you also know of different landlords and different companies now forming their own marketplaces and similar business models. So I agree with Rich 100% that that's probably been one area where Latin America has really been moving fast and successfully so, I think.
One question we got really leads us into some of the discussion we had before. There's a long history, as I think both of you said, in Latin America for luxury goods and the environment for that. What do you think the experience is going to look like post-pandemic, the shopping experience? I mean, I think you said, Eduardo, that Latin America is very different than most other places, and it doesn't rely on tourism for the shopping as much as some other places. So what is, post-pandemic, I mean, what are we seeing different?
Yeah, I think that, to kind of give a little color to the answer I'm going to give, I think it's important to share that, what we see today at a worldwide level in terms of impact to retail is that those markets that rely heavily on tourism are really hurting the most right now, right? So Europe, is obviously hurting. And even some of the sub-markets or countries within your region that rely heavily on tourism are being impacted the most, like Hawaii or something like that. But overall, in the Americas region, but even more so in Latin America, even pre-pandemic, it has been a highly localized client. Okay, so whether it's Mexico, Brazil, the weight of the local business of the total volume is usually in that 90%. You know, post pandemic, it's probably now 99% because no one can travel. But I think that knowing that historically Latin America has a very high volume of local business, I think also kind of speaks to how Latin America could in fact come out even stronger post pandemic. You know, many of these Latin American countries, from a luxury perspective, that upper echelon client travels a lot. And in many ways, Latin America loses some level of business when their highly traveled clients are in Europe and decide to purchase in Europe instead of in Latin America, right? And so now, post-pandemic, where travel is not necessarily happening, those clients are shopping more locally in each of the Latin American countries. And so Latin America historically is a lot more relational, experiential with their clients. And now that their clients have to stay home and actually spend more time with them, I think it's an opportunity for Latin America to really thrive. And how do we, make sure that we take this moment and make it long-term sustainable for the Latin America consumption? And that's by building that relationship. Latin America does an amazing job to really clientele in a very, very close relational way. And I think that that's only going to help potentially keep that client more loyal and purchasing more moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because I think it's going to come down to the experience of purchasing a bag in Paris versus the experience of purchasing a bag in your local shop with somebody that you may know that can service you in a way that you feel comfortable with. So I think it's really going to come down to that at the end of the day. And I think Eduardo had some two good KPIs there. They may not be perfect, but 99% versus 90%. We're probably going to end up somewhere in the middle, right? You're probably going to have some folks that are still going to prefer that, that experience in Paris or in Milan versus the experience in their shop. But there's going to be others that are just going to have that relationship cultivated and we'll be able to maximize. But at the end of the day, we want to service the client, whether it's here in the Americas or in Europe.
One question we just got is the Latin American consumer more prone to shop online than other areas?
I think it's increasing. I don't know if they're more prone. I would say, if I look back at, when we entered Latin America directly, now I guess 5-6 years ago, compared to now, I actually would have answered that question that the Latin America customer is more prone to shop in the store. Again, there's that connection with your sales associate, with the brand. There's that relational component that always historically has been very important in Latin America. But I do think that same client now is starting to move a lot more into the digital space and find a way to maintain that experience with, the brand or the store, but enhance it with a digital aspect to it, and they're purchasing online a lot more.
Yeah, I think it's an evolution, and I think that where we need to really, make our money is or benefit from it is understanding how quickly that evolution is going to happen, and basically putting ourselves in a position to maximize the appetite of the consumer.
Capital spend. One of the questions we're getting goes to that topic, which we've talked about before. I think you guys said that you guys are going to be cautious with regard to big capital spend in the near term. Do you see that as you guys go out in these markets, spending more on the e-com front or more in the retail space front? And is it different per country?
Yeah, I think that when a company has the long-standing place that ours does, you have to have an overarching strategy, and of course you need to adjust that strategy. But the pandemic, I think it doesn't feel that way now, but we're hoping it's temporary. So we really need to see post-pandemic, what does that look like, and then adjust accordingly. But our overarching strategy really needs to hold true, because it was built on a long-standing vision of where we want to see the company. And digital for sure already had a place in it. And I think it's just a matter of, again, just putting it at the right moment.
Couple financial questions coming in. Do you
Can I just add to that?
Please.
A second on the capital spending? I just want to make sure I at least, I think it really comes down to the balancing and the prioritizing that it kind of is the central message we keep on throwing out, right? Yes, I think organizations are going to be a lot more careful with capital spend. However, I think it depends on what area. So are more organizations going to spend more on corporate offices? Probably not. I think that, this pandemic has really forced companies to think a lot more virtual, a lot more work from home kind of scenarios. So maybe, organizations are not thinking of investing capital on offices. But I think there's going to be a lot of capital invested in digital, as Rich mentioned. But I think there's still going to be capital in brick and mortar stores as well, because this pandemic has definitely consolidated the industry in many ways. You hear a lot of bankruptcies happening for retailers, wholesalers. There's a lot of consolidation happening. And so what's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot more real estate available. There's going to be a lot more opportunities available for those brands that come out of this stronger. And so there's still going to be an appetite to invest capital in the traditional sense as well. So I think it's just a balance and a reprioritizing of that capital.
Question we have: does Latin America need to decrease barriers of entry to foreign companies entering local markets? Do you think that would help?
Well, you're asking the wrong people, because yes.
The answer is absolutely. I would, if that happens in Argentina, I would probably be there already. So yeah, absolutely.
And following up on that, is currency devaluation a big challenge for your business in Latin America? Maybe you guys could speak to that for a second.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. Obviously the way we try to handle the currencies and how it affects, it's really just maintaining a very consistent price across the entire region. And so when the U.S. is being devalued and how it impacts others, and I think it's just, we talked about agility in that same sense. As currencies are being devalued, we as an organization have to continue to monitor that and adjust prices accordingly to make sure that all of our margin targets are being met. So I think it's just staying on top of it and making the necessary changes as those things develop in a significant way.
Yeah, I think you're hit it on the head in terms of pricing, and our consumer tends to be savvy, and I think that our consumers understand very well fluctuations of exchange rates and how that's impacting the pricing that they're looking at, be it in Santiago, Chile, or wherever they are. So it's something that we need to be sure that is correct, because again, our consumer will be savvy enough to detect if something isn't really being valued correctly.
And depressed markets is something we've talked about before. What do you think are driving some of the more depressed markets in Latin America, with regard to the pandemic? And I guess it's really safety, probably first and foremost, and people really going out. But are there other things that you see? Is it, infrastructure?
It depends on which country you're talking about.
Yeah.
Security issue or not, or depressed market. I have to tell you, when I left Brazil recently, I felt like, that in many ways, the government response to the pandemic and issuing of stimulus checks, whether it's in Brazil or wherever, actually probably helped reduce the security issues, because there's a lot less people feeling the need to break the law to survive. And so there's a little bit kind of like a quietness happening there. So I think depressed markets depends on the country, depends on, the variable affecting it. I think when it comes to real estate aspect of depressed markets, I think, it depends on the country you're talking about, but in Latin America, there in our world, in luxury, there are only X amount of partners and centers that are elevated to the luxury kind of level that we need it to be. And so it's less of an issue. I think depressed markets in the world of luxury is less of a concern in Latin America than it is in the US. I think in the US, it's a little bit more of an issue in some very specific places.
Yeah, I think we operate in a space where we're not so exposed to that portion of it, because again, we're catering to a very specific consumer, your top percentage of spenders. So we really don't have a ton of visibility there.
But I do believe that this pandemic will allow and open the doors to some level of renegotiation of what fair market rents are. I mean, I think it's still a very fair question to have. If we're looking at a space in Masaryk or something like that, I think it's something to be reevaluated for sure.
So the last question I have, I'm going to tell you guys both, I did not sponsor this or encourage it, but the question is, with the number of lawyers in Latin America, that are specialized in their space, how important is it for someone to be a fashion lawyer to really understand your industry in a particular country?
I think the Latin American market is one that many companies are really starting to invest in, and I think that it's one that I think there's opportunity there and there's value there, because again, once you get a foothold in that country, you're going to have you're basically going to have a customer for a while, and a customer that can pay. So I think there's definitely some value there. If I were an attorney, it would be something that I may be focusing on.
Better than divorce law.
Well, no, divorce law always goes number one.
Yeah, no, I think it's super important. I think if you can find a partner, a local law firm that has some of the expertise, experience, and or capacity to really understand our business, understand our needs, and then apply it locally, I think it's critical. I think, it's what I did when I entered every market. I really looked for a local, business partner called a lawyer to really help navigate through all the complexities in each country in order to make sure that we were able to open up and operate at the most efficient way for the brand.
Well, guys, I don't see any more questions, and I think we've covered the topic pretty well. I really appreciate your time. Thanks again for joining us and sharing your expertise. It's invaluable, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity to speak this next time in person, maybe in Latin America, one of the presentations.
That'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate it. Ciao.
Bye. Bye-bye.